So my name is Asaf. I've been a volunteer at the Wikimedia movement for many years, in fact since 2001 when Wikipedia started. I'm an amateur digital librarian. I like linked data, and I've been teaching Wikidata around the world since 2016, so I'm not trying out any new stuff on you tonight. I'm still on Israel time. Anyway, I want to start, before I show you Wikidata, before I walk you through Wikidata, talking about 4 key problems that led to Wikidata. The first one is that data dates, or rather becomes out of date. If I have a piece of data like the population of Singapore, or the name of the mayor of Berlin, these are pieces of data that are not permanently forever true, right? They become out of date. Eventually, there's a new mayor, there's a new census, and there's a new population number, and data comes out of date. Now, those of you who have seen Wikipedia, especially in languages other than English, may have noticed occasionally that you read an article and a piece of data in the article is out of date. It lists the old mayor, or it hasn't noticed that there's been, maybe you're reading the Arabic Wikipedia article about a town in Macedonia, and the Arabic Wikipedia article doesn't know, or Arabic Wikipedia editors don't know, that there's been a census in Macedonia and there are new population numbers for Macedonia, but nobody on Arabic Wikipedia heard about it, right? That happens all the time. It's hard for an Arabic Wikipedian or a Portuguese Wikipedian to notice, to even know that there's been a new mayor elected in Macedonia, right? Upsettingly, towns in Macedonia do not send an email to Wikipedians around the world to tell them, hey, you need to update Wikipedia. For some reason, that doesn't happen. So data becomes out of date. That's just how things are. And it's becoming out of date is one problem, but noticing that it's out of date is the bigger problem. Because if we notice, we will fix it, right? We're Wikipedians. We want things to be correct and accurate, so we will fix it if we can. But that's the thing. We don't have the trigger. We don't have the notice, the notification to tell us, hey, you need to correct something on Wikipedia. And also, let's say we did get the memo. New mayor to this Macedonian town. Now we need to update it on Polish Wikipedia and German Wikipedia and French Wikipedia and all the other hundreds of Wikipedias. And that's repetitive work and boring work, right? So that's one big problem, is data becoming out of date. Not noticing that it has become out of date is a big problem. Another problem is that we cannot make lateral cross-cutting queries very easily. And what do I mean by that? Maybe you know the feature on Wikipedia of categories. How many of you know about categories on Wikipedia? Raise your hand. Yeah, most of you. So, at the bottom of every article, there are categories. So if you're reading about someone who won the Nobel Prize for Literature, at the bottom there's a category, Nobel Prize winners in literature, right? And if you click on that, you see other Nobel Prize winners in literature. Great. So if I want to find out, I know one Norwegian author, and I want to find out who are some other Norwegian authors, I can easily just go to that one Norwegian author I know, click on the category, and get a list. Great. But what if I want to find how many Nobel Prize winners were born in 1894? It's a bit of a weird question, but let's say that's my question. Is there any reasonable way to get that information out of Wikipedia? There is not. What if I want to ask, who are some 19th century British authors who wrote in French? What if I want to ask, what Flemish city had the most painters born in it? Because you know how Flemish cities are, right? They keep producing painters. That's just what they do. But which one of them had the most painters born in it? Again, it's a maybe interesting question, maybe a weird question. Maybe it's a question never occurred to you to ask. But I want to suggest to you that the reason you don't normally ask such questions is that you know they're impossible to answer. You know there's no easy way to figure out which Flemish city had the most painters born in it. And even if you go, I don't know, to the University of Singapore, to the reference librarian, and say, please help me find out which Flemish city had the most painters born in it, the reference librarian would also not have an easy way to answer, right? They might give you a big encyclopedia of Flemish paintings, right? And you can use the index and start looking at each painter's place of birth and make a little count and come up with an answer to your question. There's no easy way to get that answer. And again, I suggest to you that we have internalized this limitation. Just like before they invented flight, you know, nobody felt the need to be in New York the next day because it was impossible. If you were in Europe or elsewhere, you know, you could not be in New York the next day. That was just not outside the realm of possibility, so nobody needed to do it. And now people do need to do it. Why? Because it's possible. So we have developed needs accordingly. I suggest to you that if it were possible to answer such questions, we would start having such questions. Okay. By the way, all these questions that I asked, what if I want to ask them in Punjabi or Cantonese? So the answers to these questions do exist on Wikipedia. It's just difficult to get the information from Wikipedia. That's the second key problem I'm discussing today. The third one is describing data with data. What do I mean by that? A piece of data often has characteristics, things we want to say about it, that's not always easy to express. For example, if someone is the mayor of the city, it's not a, like we said, it's not a permanent fact, right? They weren't always the mayor, right? They weren't born the mayor of the city, right? They became mayor at some point. And if they're no longer the mayor, then they stop being the mayor at some point. And also, how do I know that? How do I know they're the mayor? There must be some reference, some source that tells me officially, formally, reliably, this is the mayor or this was the mayor. So this one piece of data, X is the mayor of Y, has other data about it. Since when, until when, according to what, right? These are all pieces of information that are not independent. They are describing kind of the one main piece of information that I care about, which is this person was mayor, right? And a final problem that I want to mention is correlating data from multiple sources. So let's say I'm interested in Vincent van Gogh, right? Or Van Gogh, right? I want to learn everything I can about this person. So yes, Wikipedia gives me a bunch of information, but of course there's a lot of material about this famous painter, right? There's the paintings themselves, there's biographies, there's letters, there's all kinds of things, and they're all over the world in different museums and libraries and archives and catalogs. How do I gather all of that? How do I even discover that a certain museum I never heard of has a little known work by Van Gogh? Or the letters are in this archive. How do I even discover that? Now, I can go to some of the sources I do know, the Library of Congress, the, I don't know, British Museum, right? The Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam. I can go to those places. But what about all the places I haven't heard of, don't think of? If only I had some ID, some key that I could say, this is the key, I want to open all the boxes that this key opens, that would be pretty great, right? So these four problems, pause for surprise, have one solution. And that one solution is an editable central storage for structured and linked data on a wiki under a free license, which is a long way of saying Wikidata. That's what Wikidata is. And structured data, which we'll get into if you haven't heard or known the term, is what makes querying and describing data possible. It gives each piece of data, each datum, its own life cycle, its own references, its own provenance, which is a term librarians and archivists like. Provenance means where it came from, right? So every piece of data can have its own little story. This piece of data is from there. This other piece of data about the same person is from another place. Now, the fact that it is linked data is what gives us the real power. The power to ask complicated questions such as, who are some authors who were born in London and died in Berlin, right? Or who is the most famous person from Singapore, right? These are questions we can answer because the data is linked. The fact that it is central, that it is a centralized storage, of course, eliminates duplication, means we don't have to repeat ourselves. It means that when we update the name of the mayor of a certain town in Macedonia, once that value is available to all the Wikipedias and everybody else in the world, and we don't have to update it on hundreds and hundreds of sites. It also means that the people who do notice something is wrong, probably Macedonians would notice it first, they can fix it so that the rest of us don't have to even know that the update happened, right? It's just correct, it's just updated already for us. The fact that it's a wiki means that we get everything we expect from a wiki, which means revision control, all the edits are tracked and reversible. We have talk pages, we can discuss things, right? Everything we are used to from wikis. And the fact it's under a free license, the specific license is CC0. It's the equivalent of the public domain, which means you can do anything you want with the data forever, including commercial use. You don't have to even attribute it. It would be nice, but you don't have to. It's really available for any use by humans or machines. That's what Wikidata offers. In short, Wikidata is love. So let's zoom in a bit and understand what structured data means. Structured data is based on modern structured data. There have been some other older ideas. Modern structured data is based on triples, on combinations of 3 elements. And these triples in Wikidata are called claims. And a claim attempts to express one single fact. And it expresses it by saying that a certain item, that's the topic, that's what we are describing. For example, a person, or a city, or a book, or a river. This item, this topic, has a certain property, which is the specific thing we're trying to say about the item. For example, the person's date of birth. That's one piece of information about the person. That's a property. Another property might be place of birth, or date of death, or languages spoken, or all kinds of other things. That one piece of information has this value, right? In case of the date of birth, it has this date, right? That's a single claim. So, another way to think about that is if you imagine some kind of form that you have to fill out, some kind of bureaucratic form of the kind you filled out countless times in your life. Let's think about a form that is about a person. I hope you can see the details in the graphic. So we have a form. The whole form is about you, right? So you are the item. You are the topic of the form. Now, each field name in the form is like the property in Wikidata terms, right? Name, address, city, home phone. These are the properties. What you fill out in each such field, that's the values, okay? And this is very much how Wikidata works, right? It has, if you imagine, it has like forms about certain topics, and each such form has a whole bunch of fields with values, right? So we have a form about the city of Berlin, we have a form about Vincent van Gogh, etc. Okay. So, for example, if our item is about a country, what kinds of properties, what kinds of information would we expect? Things like population, land area, official languages, anthem, borders, gross domestic product, right? These are all questions that are relevant to ask about a country. They are different from the questions we would ask about a person, right? A person does not have an anthem, usually. Does anyone have an anthem here? Okay. You have an anthem? Oh, okay. I'm still waiting. I ask this every time, and I'm still waiting for someone to say, yes, I have an anthem. Anyway, you know, a person doesn't have a gross domestic product or borders, right? Boundaries, yes, but not borders. So when we do describe a person, we would ask things like name, date of birth, place of birth, occupation, citizenship, children, parents, place of education, all kinds of things that we care about people. But people, again, don't have gross domestic product or land area, right? Okay, so here are some examples. These are examples of claims in this triple form: item, property, and value, right? We can talk about the item Earth, the item describing our planet, right? The property we're talking about is the highest point on Earth, and the value of that property is Mount Everest, right? That's the highest point on Earth. That's a claim. That's a single piece of information. It answers the question, where or what is the highest point on Earth? Here's a second claim, a separate claim. This one is not about Earth. This one is about Mount Everest. You see, the item, the leftmost side, is Mount Everest now. And what we say about Mount Everest is that the property elevation above sea level, which is a fancy way of saying height, right? The value of this property is 8,848 meters, right? That's the height or the elevation of Mount Everest. Now, this may, for a second, look like it's about the same thing, but it isn't, right? The first one answers what is the highest point on the entire planet. The second one answers, this point, how high is it? These are different questions with different answers, and they're about different things. You couldn't ask, what is the elevation above sea level of Earth, right? That's a nonsensical question, right? Earth has all kinds of elevations. It's not a relevant question to ask about the planet. But about a particular point on the planet, we can talk about elevation. Here's a third claim, again about the Earth. The deepest point on Earth is the Challenger Deep in the ocean, right? And now we talk about the Challenger Deep itself, and we say that its elevation above sea level is minus 11 kilometers, right? The elevation above is minus 11 kilometers because it's not above sea level, obviously. Great. Another way of looking at it, which is a little more like the form that we talked about earlier, if we were filling out a form about the Earth, right? So the item, the topic of the whole form, oh, sorry, you're not seeing my cursor. Yeah, the topic of the whole form is the Earth. And what we say about it are two things. I mean, we'll probably say a lot of things, but here are two things we say about it. The property highest point has the value Mount Everest. The property deepest point has the value Challenger Deep. And then we have a different form about the Challenger Deep, and we say that its elevation above sea level is minus 11K, etc. Right? These are two views of the same claims, the same pieces of data. Let's look at it one more time with numeric IDs, this time, numeric IDs. So on Wikidata, every item has an ID, a numerical ID, and it's called a QID because all of these IDs start with Q and then a number. So the Earth is Q2. It's one of the earliest items we created on Wikidata. It's Q2. Every property on Wikidata also has a numerical ID. It starts with P610 in this case for highest point. The deepest point is P1589. And the Mount Everest is its own item. You remember, we also had claims about Mount Everest. It's its own item. It has a different Q number, Q513. In other words, we say that item Q2 has property 610 with value Q513, right? We humans prefer the words, but computers prefer it without our squishy human speak, right? So in terms of Wikidata's database, these claims actually look like this, right? Q2 has property 610 with Q513. That's what's actually in the database. That's not convenient for us, so we humans will stick to having our human labels. By the way, these labels are in English, right? I mean, in my example. Why do we use numbers at all? Well, we use numbers because labels, these labels, are ambiguous and sometimes redundant. If I ask you, if I tell you I'm thinking of London, what do I have in mind? You would probably think about the capital of the United Kingdom, but I might have had in mind an excellent restaurant in Hong Kong called London that I've been to. It's also called London. London is also a place in Ontario, Canada. It's also the name of any number of books or movies or other restaurants around the world, right? They're all called London. Yes, you say, but obviously, you know, you mean, when you say London, you're talking about the UK, right? No, wrong. It really depends on the context, right? If I'm in Ontario, I'm probably talking about London, Ontario. Or not, maybe I am talking about the British London, right? It depends. Humans use the same label for more than one thing, and that's confusing. Conversely, humans use different labels for the same thing, right? French speakers don't call London London, they call it Londres, right? That's a different name, and I don't know, there are other names for London. It's not always even clear that a certain name in another language is about this country, right? So for example, Spain is called Spain, España, Hispania, right? Versions of that in most languages. In my native language, which is Hebrew, Spain is called Sfarad. Nothing like Spain, España, nobody would notice, nobody would recognize, but that's what we call it. And if I only speak Hebrew, I would look for Sfarad, not Spain. And I would expect the computer to understand what I'm talking about. So that's why we use numbers, right? So that we don't have to bicker among ourselves whether we should call it Spain, Hispania, España, or Sfarad, right? Numbers are neutral. Remember that not everyone speaks English. I think this is easy to remember here in Singapore, but many people around the world who are monolingual English speakers tend to assume, yeah, almost everybody speaks English. That's far from true. The majority of the vast majority of the world population does not speak English at all. Okay, so that's why we use numbers, right? If we can say, okay, Spain, Sfarad, Hispania, whatever you want to call it, has Q number 610 or whatever, fine. We can all agree on a number. It's arbitrary. It doesn't mean anything. Okay. Questions so far before we actually look at Wikidata about what I've covered so far? Claims, structured data, yes?
For the properties, are they just sequentially numbered as they?
Yes. Yes, there's no meaning to the number, neither of queue numbers nor property numbers, right? They're basically numbered in the order they are created. The only thing they mean is how soon or how late volunteers thought of it, right? Q1 is the universe. Q2 is Earth. Q42 is Douglas Adams. But broadly, they're random, and that one was not random, I admit. But basically, most Q numbers are just arbitrarily assigned as items are created. Okay, any other questions? Yes? No. Thank you for that question. Property numbers are not per item. So the highest point will always be P610. Whenever there's an item, whenever there's we could also talk about the highest point in Singapore or the highest point in Canada, which is not Everest, right? That would also be P610. In other words, you can reliably take any item, any Q number, and check whether it has property 610, and you will find the highest point of that geography or region or country, if it has one, right? Again, people don't have a highest point. I mean, technically we do, I guess, but it's not very interesting to express in Wikidata, right? Okay. So yes, thank you for that question. The property names are not per item, right? Okay. So let's go and explore Wikidata by visiting wikidata.org. Yeah. So this is what Wikidata looks like. And I'm going to switch to mirror view so I can see what I'm doing. Yeah. In a minute now, there we go. Okay, I'm zooming in a bit so you can see, but again, if you can't see, come closer. There are plenty of seats here in the front because we're going to look at items and see some examples. So since we mentioned him, let's go to Q42. Q42, Douglas Adams, right? Author of The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. But by the way, most of you came in here not knowing that Douglas Adams is Q42. Am I really expected to look things up by Q number? Of course not. Let's check. Barack Obama. Here is Barack Obama, and his Q number is Q76. Yes, it's one of the early items created, I guess. Germany also has a low Q number because the people who created Wikidata were Germans. So anyway, let's look at Obama since we brought it up. So as you saw, I could just search for it, just by typing, and I have autocomplete, and I have a bunch of options. If I just type Barack, I have Barack Obama, and there is some statistics going on here, right? Most people who type Barack are looking for Barack Obama, but they may just be interested in the male given name, Barack. They may be interested in a Senegalese French rapper named Barack. I never heard of this rapper, but I'm guessing in Senegal, he's quite famous. There's also apparently a Hungarian brandy named Barack. As we can see, there's lots of things that could be named Barack, just like there are lots of things that are named London. And depending on who I am and what context I'm searching in, I may have meant that and not Obama. So Wikidata tries to help me find what I need. By the way, I can also search in my own language. So this is what Barack Obama is called in Hebrew. I don't know if you can see them, the characters, but anyway, you probably can't read them, but this is Hebrew. I searched in Hebrew for Barack Obama, and I found Barack Obama. You see? It did give me Barack Obama. By the way, it gave me the father as well, because his father is also named Barack Obama, right, Senior. So you can even search in your language, which begins to answer the question I raised of what if I want to ask questions in Punjabi, right? Wikidata does allow you to search in your language. I could have typed Sfarad, and I would find Spain. That's magic, right? If I only speak Hebrew, I don't know how you say Sfarad in other languages. I type it in my language, I find it. How did that happen? Excellent question. We're going to look at how that happened right now. No, this is a good question. It's a question the presenter has an answer for. That's a good question. So let's look at Barack Obama and find out how that happened, that magic. The first thing we see is that there's a name here, right? In Wikidata terms, that's called a label. Because, people have names, but books don't have names. Books have titles. So a more generic kind of name for the thing you use to call the thing is a label, right? So people have names, books have titles, but generally they're all labels. So we have a label, Barack Obama. We have a Q number, very crucially, because everything Wikidata knows about Barack Obama will be filed under Q76, right? No matter what you call him in your language, it's Q76 for Wikidata. Great. We have this line here. It says President of the United States from 2009 to 2017. What is this line? In Wikidata, we call it a description. And the only purpose, I want to stress this, the only purpose of the description line is to help you pick the right one when there's more than one such item. That's the only purpose. It is not meant to really summarize everything that can be said about this person, right? There's a lot more that we could say about Barack Obama. But crucially, this helps us distinguish, for example, between the guy who was president and the other guy who is his father. They have the same name, right? So when we type here, Barack, as we did before, you see in this dropdown, I hope you can see, again, if you can't, please come closer. You see that Wikidata gives me items, that's in bold, but it also gives me that line underneath. That's this line, the description line. That's the line that helps me understand that this Barack, and it's just Barack, right? This Barack is a Senegalese French rapper. This other Barack is a Hungarian brandy. If I didn't have that line, how would I, it would just say Barack, Barack, Barack. Which one do I click? Which is the one I want? Do you understand? This line is what helps me make that choice in the drop downs and in auto-suggest mode. That's its function. That's why we have a description. So in other words, when you are creating a description in Wikidata, don't sweat it. It doesn't have to be like the perfect distillation of everything this person has done or what this book is about. Just help us tell that apart from Hungarian brandy, right? Just help us realize what this is talking about. Okay. So he's president of the United States. Now, to your question, how does the language magic happen? It happens because Wikidata knows because it has been taught, how to say Barack Obama in many, many, many languages. So this shows English, Hebrew, and Arabic, just because that happened to be the languages I chose. But if I click all languages, you can see Wikidata knows what to call and how to spell Barack Obama in many, many, many languages, including Cherokee, right? And that is how, when you type in Hebrew or Cherokee, it will know you mean this Q76. I mean, in Wikidata terms, it'll go, oh, yeah, you mean Q76. Why didn't you say so, right? We use human labels. Wikidata always translates it to the Q number. So that's how it works. And as you can see, by the way, some of those languages, for example, this is how you say Barack Obama in Amharic, spoken in Ethiopia, but there's no description defined. In other words, if I were to use Wikidata in Amharic, I was using it in English. The interface was in English, right? But if I switch to Amharic, because that's the only language I know, and I would type Barack Obama like that, or just Barack, right? I might get as one of the results Barack Obama, but I wouldn't know this is definitely the president guy because it doesn't have a description in Amharic, right? Because again, the description also has to be language dependent, right? The English description is not the Amharic description. Even if they say the same thing, they say it in their own language. Okay, so this is how that works, and that's already one easy way you can contribute to Wikidata. You can find things that aren't labeled or described in a language that you speak, and just add that. So the next person, maybe someone who doesn't speak English, can find it in your other language. Okay, so that's just about names, what we call things and how to discover them. Very important, but that's just the name, the title, right, of our form. Let's go on to some properties. What do we know about Barack Obama? Here are the statements. That's a collection of those claims, including their sort of metadata for each claim. So the first thing we say about items in Wikidata is, what kind of a thing is it in the broadest terms? I mean, are we talking about a human? See, Barack Obama is an instance of, like an example, an exemplar, an item of the class human. Sure, right? What else would he be? Well, we also describe rivers on Wikidata, right? So, saying instance of human already tells us he's not a book, he's not a mountain, he's not a river, he's not an abstract religious concept. There's any number of things we could describe on Wikidata beyond human. So even just that one simple claim, this item is about a human, not about some other kind of thing. It's very important. It may seem trivial, but it's very important. It helps software that is using this data know what kind of relevant questions to display. For example, I can write some app or some software that if it encounters instance of human, it knows the land area or anthem or currency are irrelevant things to ask, right? Okay, moving on. He was part of these congresses. Here's an image. Wikidata knows of a good default image for Barack Obama. Of course, we have hundreds or thousands of images of Barack Obama on Wikimedia Commons. If you don't know about Commons, it's our multimedia repository with over 80 million free media items. But Wikidata gives you, if you're looking for just a good picture of Obama, here's a good default one. Again, why is this useful? Because it allows for computer programs to kind of easily and instantly display a representative, good default image of something, instead of going through commons and, you know, picking from the hundreds and hundreds of pictures a relevant one, right? And now this image, by the way, the property is image, the value is this particular file name, right? President Barack Obama.jpg. That's a file name from Commons. But under this, you see, there are, in smaller print, additional properties and values. These are called subproperties or qualifiers. And they are this data about data that I mentioned. For example, this tells us the point in time this photo was taken. That's a potentially relevant piece of information, right? I mean, a photo of Obama age 6 and a photo of Obama in his presidency are both photos of Obama, but one of them is more relevant than the other, right, for most uses, right? So it kind of helps if I'm able to pick one that's from a relevant year. We have kind of an official, the media legend, right, meaning the official caption of the media is official photograph of President Barack Obama, and it is available in multiple languages. Here's a video of Obama from the State of the Union address. Wikidata gives you that video. Onwards to more basic things. Sex or gender, male. Country of citizenship, United States of America. And Kenya, right? He was a citizen of Kenya at one point because of his father, who is Kenyan, right? But that ended in 1982, right? Presumably when he was naturalized as a US citizen. No, he was born in the States. He was born in the States. Sorry, he was born in the States, but I guess he had the additional Kenyan citizenship and ended it or did not renew it or whatever. By the way, we have references for this piece of information, right? So again, the property is country of citizenship. The value, first of all, there's more than one value, right? Some people are citizens of more than one country. In this case, one of the values is Kenya, but it has a qualifier that says that ended in 1982. And here are the references, right? Here's a New York Times piece that talks about, was Obama a Kenyan citizen, right? So again, I'm able to describe the piece of data, describe the statement that he was, not is, was a citizen of Kenya with a reference, with a point in time, and with citations, like on Wikipedia, like a footnote, right, that says, how do I know this? Where is it from? What else? Birth name, Barack Hussein Obama II. And we have here the given name, right, like the first name. And we have, Wikidata describes it as a series, because this guy has a middle name, right? Barack Hussein Obama, right? Barack and Hussein are both his given names, but they are in order. So Wikidata tells you he has the given name Barack, and the ordinal of the series, right? What number in the series this is 1. And he has the name Hussein, but the ordinal in the series is 2, right? So not Hussein Barack, Barack Hussein. Again, this may seem super trivial, but it helps computers get it right? Assemble the name in the correct order. Family name Obama. Nickname Barry. I wouldn't call him Barry, but maybe some people do. Evidently not after 1980. Pronunciation audio. How awesome is that? Wikidata gives you an audio file about how to pronounce his name. Will this work? No, it doesn't. But what if I point my microphone here?
Barack Hussein Obama.
Yeah, anyway. Yeah, so now, by the way, not all data is available for every item, of course, right? Wikidata only knows what people have taught it. So Barack Hussein Obama is a famous person. A lot of people care about this person. And so there's high quality data about him. If you look up some, I don't know, obscure athlete from the junior league of, I don't know, maybe they won't have a pronunciation audio for their name, but you could add it, right? If you're a native speaker of the language the name is in, you could add it. Okay, date of birth, place of birth. There's a lot of information here. Father, mother, step-parent, sibling. again, Wikidata knows a lot about Barack Obama because a lot of people cared about him, and he was covered in a lot of sources, a lot of detail. There are sources for this information, right? There are a lot of people out there about whose parents or siblings we just don't know anything, right? And then they would not appear on Wikidata. Spouse, Michelle Obama. Start time, right? Again, it is true that she is his spouse, but she wasn't always his spouse, right? They weren't born married, right? So there is a start time for this fact, before which it was not a fact, right? Children, relatives, etc., etc. Okay? Native language English, but he also speaks Indonesian, right? Because of the time he spent there. Okay, so there's a whole bunch of things, right? Occupation, of course, politician, lawyer, political writer, community organizer. And again, these pieces of data have start and end times, right? He's no longer a community organizer, right? Okay, so there's a whole bunch of information about Obama, as you can see. I'm going to skip through some of it because I want to show you the other part of a Wikidata item. Whole bunch of things. Awards given, right? We know about all his medals and awards and Nobel Prize, etc. Height. We know the height of Obama. Now, most people on Wikidata don't have their height listed. If you look for the height of, I don't know, Sigmund Freud, it probably isn't on Wikidata because we usually don't care about people's height, right? Unless they're basketball players or models, right? Where it really matters how tall they are, I guess. You know, for most people, we just don't perceive of a person's height or weight as a relevant piece of information. But I guess someone got Obama's official height and cited it in the New York Times or something, so Wikidata knows it. Anyway, what I wanted to show you is this. After all the pieces of information about Obama, there's a separate section, after the statement section, there's a separate section called identifiers. And identifiers are magic. Remember I told you we want a magical key that will open all the various boxes in the whole world about our topic? This is it. So this is a collection of identifiers in other databases, not Wikidata, about this topic, Barack Obama. So VIAF is a big database by librarians. It's the Virtual International Authority File. And librarians really care about authority files. And this is sort of a mega collection of national libraries around the world of their authority files. And that database has an ID for Barack Obama. Why do they have an ID for Barack Obama? Because he wrote books, right? So all the authors have IDs. And this is the ID for Barack Obama in VIAF. If I want to know, for example, what is the Bulgarian title for Barack Obama's book, VIAF will tell me, right? And how do I find it in VIAF? Well, I simply click this number, this ID, and it takes me directly to VIAF. Even if I've never heard of VIAF and I don't really know how to navigate it, this already takes me, you know, cuts through the homepage and everything and takes me directly, yes, I accept the cookies, takes me directly to the VIAF site record for Barack Obama. And here I can look up, you know, the Bulgarian title of his book. So, you know, it's a different database with a different function, different kinds of information that it gives me, different from Wikidata, but Wikidata gave me the key, took me to that database. And maybe I didn't even know that VIAF existed. And if you scroll down here, there are hundreds of other databases here. The National Library of Brazil ID, the National Library of Chile ID, the French National Library, Canadiana, I don't know, the German National Dateibank, right, the data bank of Germany, all kinds of, the Greek National Library, National Library of Israel, Korea, Library of Congress, et cetera, all kinds of national libraries, but not just national libraries. Also, let's see what we have here. Lots of national libraries. ABC News topic ID, right? ABC News, the American news network, has a topic ID through which I can look up all the items in ABC News about Obama, all all cinema person ID, Africultures person ID. I don't know what Africultures is. It's some kind of database. I can click through and find out. Right? So again, this is a collection of magical keys to other databases all about Barack Obama. Now, Barack Obama is a relatively uncommon name, but imagine you were studying some particular John Smith, right? You know, not that John Smith, the other John Smith, right? And you want to look for materials about this John Smith in a national library or a big database of some sort. If you just type John Smith in the search box, you know, you'll get everything they have about all the John Smiths. And that can be, you know, a lot of work to tell apart. Wait, is this about the guy I care about, or is this about some other John Smith? Wikidata solves that for you. If you find the John Smith you care about on Wikidata and click the link to that ID, not the name John Smith, but the ID of that particular John Smith in that other database, Wikidata has done you a big favor. You don't have to sift through all the irrelevant John Smith IDs. Okay. Yeah, so there's like, again, hundreds and hundreds of these magical keys. So I have just given you a big superpower of how to search for information. And at the very end of the Wikidata item, we have what we call site links, which are links to other Wikimedia sites. Of course, Wikipedia. So we have, as you can see, 242 languages have a Wikipedia article about Obama. And we have links to them. So again, if I don't know how to spell Obama in Bengali, I can still click here, BN is Bengali, and get to the Bengali article about Obama if I have some need for it. Moving on, we also have Wiki News categories with news items about Obama, Wiki Quote pages about Obama, Wiki Source pages about Obama with, you know, speeches he gave, etc. And of course, Commons has material about Obama. All right, so that was a little tour of Wikidata. And in the few minutes we have left, I want to first take questions, and then with whatever time we have left after questions, I'll show you some cool things about Wikidata. Questions? Yes? Yeah, you can. You can. The norm is to use lowercase letters because it is meant to be a parenthetical after the name, like Barack Obama, parentheses, President of the United States, right? But yeah, if it's like a title or something and it's important to use a capital letter, you can. Other questions? Yes? Yeah. Yeah. So first of all, ideally, every piece of information on Wikidata will have a reference, a source, just like every piece of information on Wikipedia would. In reality, not everything has a source on Wikidata, nor on Wikipedia, right? We have lots of information on Wikipedia that doesn't have a source, may or may not be true. The fact it doesn't have a source doesn't mean it's not true. It just means we don't have a source to verify it, right? So just like we tolerate things without a source on Wikipedia up to a point, and it depends on what you're saying, right? So if you say about someone that they were born in this village, maybe I don't have a particular reason to doubt it, and I would tolerate it on Wikipedia and on Wikidata without a source. But if you say they won the Nobel Prize, that I would not accept without a source, right? It's also the kind of thing for which there's no excuse for not having a source, right? The Nobel Prize is well covered. You should be able to show this person won the Nobel Prize. And if you're not able to show it, they probably didn't win the Nobel Prize, right? But for someone having been born in some village, there very often isn't good documentation because, of course, they weren't famous when they were born, right? So how can you establish that if you do want to provide a reference? There are many ways, and they're not different from what you do on Wikipedia if you have Wikipedia experience. But generally, you would look for, I mean, sometimes you have access to the actual birth record in some government database or local database, and there's nothing more formal or better than that. Other times, you would rely on the person's own testimony as given in an interview, for example. In which case, you should say, you know, according to X, they were born on this date, etc. And then you can cite it with the interview, and it's still a fact because you said according to, right? You're not asserting that they were born on that date. You're saying they say they were born on that date. And here's the interview where they say that. That's an acceptable source, for lack of a better one. Again, if you have a reputable news source, not an interview, but a news coverage. For example, when people die, famous people die, there's often an obituary about them in a paper. You can cite the obituary that will say where they were born. That's considered a reliable source, right? Even though these days a lot of reporters go to Wikipedia to look for the information, so there is the circular reference problem. But generally, these are the kinds of things you would use as a reference. And again, the nature of the reference and the rigor that we would expect from the reference depends on the kind of information you are citing. A place of birth is usually not very controversial, can go without a reference, can go with a fairly weak reference like an interview. If you want to, again, to assert that they won some major award or that they are, I don't know, the #1 ranked tennis player, you know, you need to show how that's the case. Yes, other questions? Yes. Yeah. They do not have different queue numbers, no. So let me show you. Let's take an example. What language do you contribute in, or what language are you interested in? In Twi, okay. Yeah, so let's start by changing our language here. I click this icon here, you see at the top, that has a, is that a Japanese character, I guess? And A. And I select a different language, like, say, Twi. There we go. For those who don't know, Twi is a language spoken in Ghana. And I changed my language to Twi, and now everything, Wikidata will try and speak Twi to me as much as it can, which of course depends on whether volunteers have translated the interface of Wikidata to Twi. And as you can see, they did, at least somewhat, right? The main page, the item, the talk page, see, these are Twi words now, not English. Can you see that? The menu here is mostly in Twi. However, for example, create a new item is still in English, right? Because for whatever reason, nobody translated that into Twi yet. You can help. But anyway, as you can see, this same item, Q76, Barack Obama, is now trying to show me things in Twi. For example, it still says instance of, because nobody translated the English property name instance of into Twi. And someone should do that. But if someone does that once, it'll be updated for everyone, right? But the value, remember what the value was? What was the value of instance of here? Human, remember? So apparently, Nipa is human in Twi. Now, how does it know to do that? How does it know to say that? If I click on this, I see the Wikidata item, human. That's Q5. There is an item about what a human is. You know, it's Homo sapiens, etc. I mean, there's a bunch of things we can say about the concept of human. And this concept, if you look at the language box here, you see that in English, it's called human. In Hebrew, it's called Adam. And in Twi, it's Nipa. Okay, so someone taught Wikidata once that a human in Twi is Nipa, and that's it. Now I can look at the article, at the item about Obama, and get the information in Twi. It's not a separate item. Does that answer your question? What? If you're, well, you shouldn't create an item if the item already exists. But if you didn't know, then you will create a new item about Barack Obama in Twi, and eventually you would either want to connect it to Wikipedia, and then you will notice there already exists an item, or you would or someone else who speaks English will notice, right? I mean, yes, people can do that. That's fixable. So Wikidata has a merge mechanism where you can say, oh, I see this was created by mistake. People didn't know that there already is an item about Obama. We will merge all the Twi values here into the main existing Barack Obama item and delete this new item. So there is a way to fix that. It's not the end of the world if someone did that. But yeah, this is a good example of the true multilingualism of Wikidata. And just to show a little more complete example, let's go to French, for example, which at least most of you can read. And you can see that now I can see the item in French. By the way, even the description has changed, of course, right? Président des États-Unis, right? This is now in French. And all the properties, right? Nature de l'élément, right? That's the instance of in French, is human being. And part of image, it looks like image, but it's not, it's image. You know, everything here is now in French, both the properties and the values. And that's because in French, they translated most of these or all of these properties already. So yes, some of the languages with smaller communities still have a bunch of translation work to go. But broadly, this does allow people to browse Wikidata in their own language. And the great thing is, you don't, if you only read French or Twi, you don't depend on only the knowledge that other Twi speakers have created for you, like you do on Wikipedia, right? You can benefit from knowledge that was curated by lots of people who speak lots of languages, and it's made available to you in your language, because someone once translated human into Twi and instance of into Twi, and it works. Okay, other questions? Yes. Yeah, you can do that either way. So there is a merge button on Wikidata, and if you stand on one of the items, you can click merge, and it will ask you what is the QID of the other item. And then by default, it would merge into the older item. Okay, on the assumption that the older item has more data and the newer item was created by mistake. But it doesn't terribly matter because, you know, it'll merge the data. Whatever you put in the new item that doesn't exist in the old item will be added to the old item. So the result will still be the addition of those items. The final QID will be the old QID, yeah. Again, on the assumption that more things are already linking to it, etc., so you want to keep the old QID. Yeah. Yes? Yeah. That's a very, very good question. And the question is essentially about the different ways, different languages and different cultures conceptualize the world, right? Just like some languages make a distinction between, say, dark blue and light blue, and they have totally different words, right? They're not dark blue and light blue like in English. There's one word, which means dark blue, and another completely different word that means light blue, and they don't even think about it as variations of the same color, right? But in English, to an English speaker, it's like, yeah, this is dark blue, this is light blue, but they're basically blue, right? No, the other person would say, they're different colors, different words, right? So just like we cut up the world differently in different languages, right? When we say these two belong to the same class, and another language would say, no, they're completely different. This can also carry to more abstract concepts like what is a labor union or what is a democracy? Is it only if you have representatives or if it's, So in other words, what this gentleman is pointing out to is that it's not always just about translation, because you can translate the term, but it wouldn't necessarily have the same denotation, the same meaning in the target language. That is a very true and complicated problem for Wikidata in general, right? Because it attempts to conceptualize everything everywhere in the world in a language-independent way. And that is obviously a doomed attempt. It will not always work. And the way to deal with it is, there's a number of ways to deal with it, and they're all sort of beginning with, well, it depends, right? In some cases, you may want to have a separate property. For example, maybe most of the world says, well, this is a labor union, but in France or somewhere, well, it really depends if it's this type or that type. And then you might want to add a property called, I don't know, French classification of nonprofit. And then the value of that would be this type or that type. It's really important for French speakers, not an issue for others. But you could model that if you decide that's important enough. So that's one way to handle it. I don't want to go too much into it because this is an introductory session, but you hit on a true challenge on Wikidata, which is generally one of the many problems of data modeling in this space. I'll just say that most data modeling environments have like some committee or some group of experts, and they decide on the ontology, like the structure of things. What is a class and what is a subclass, right? And only what they say goes, right? Every piece of data that you put into the system has to follow that tree of classifications. That's the traditional way of building structured data. Wikidata, being a wiki, took a radically different approach. And it's basically a structured data database without a centralized, dictated structure. We, the Wikidata volunteers, get to make it up as we go, create the structures that we need, and yes, this also means a degree of chaos, a degree of unsynchronizedness. For example, I don't know, French films may be modeled in Wikidata in a particular way, and the Nigerian films are modeled in a different way, whereas you would expect all films on Wikidata to have more or less the same fields. You might expect that, but that's not how it works. But, again, having realized that, if we notice, we have thousands of French films modeled, expressed in this way, and then thousands of Nigerian films expressed in that way. Now that we realize this, can we reconcile it? Can we create some, mixed model that accommodates both? Maybe we can, and then we can do that, right? That can be a project that we work on. Or maybe we can't, right? And it just stays that way, that Nigerian films are modeled in this way, French films are modeled in that way, and that's okay. It'll be harder for an app that tries to display data about all films, because it would have to sort of say, well, if the film is Nigerian, then these are the fields, and if it's French, these are the other fields. It's harder for computerized uses, but we humans are fortunately flexible enough to somehow live with that duality. So again, it is a genuine challenge. One of the more advanced things you can do on Wikidata is to tackle these, modeling problems and reconciliation problems. But that's beyond the scope for our session right now. And I want to continue to teach you about queries, which is where the power of Wikidata really shines. But first, when you put something into Wikidata, you don't have to guess the property name, right? Like, well, I want to express, I don't know, where this person was born. Is it called birthplace or place of birth or place where this person was born? What is the name of the property? You don't have to guess. There is a tool. And by the way, these slides are already available in the program page for this talk. So you can look at all these links. But I can just type, I don't know, birth here in this tool, and I already get a filtered list of all the various properties having to do with birth, birthday, birth rate, whatever, right? So that's one way to look up properties, so you don't have to invent them for sure. I'm going to skip all that, but I do want to show you this. This is an example of the power of Wikidata and multilingualism. This is the Esperanto Wikipedia, okay? It's Wikipedia in the artificial Esperanto language. It's a very small Wikipedia. Not a lot of people contribute to Esperanto. And that's exactly what I want to show you, because I searched here on the Esperanto Wikipedia. Excuse me. This is interrupting. Could you keep it down? I've searched on the Esperanto Wikipedia for the author Helen DeWitt. She's an American author I like, and there is no article about her on Esperanto Wikipedia yet. But what if I speak Esperanto? I mean, there are almost no people who speak only Esperanto, right? But what if I speak, for example, Czech and Esperanto, and I don't find an article in Czech, I don't speak English, and I want to know about this American author. So as you can see, Wikipedia told me, did you mean Helena DeWitt? No, I did not. It says you can create the page. You can create the page Helen DeWitt. That's not what I want to do. I'm looking for information about her. I have some very irrelevant results of some other people named DeWitt, right? But I also have this link here, discover data on the topic. And if I click that, something magical happens. I get a generated page in Esperanto entirely based on Wikidata. No Esperanto speaker ever tried to make any piece of information about Helen DeWitt. But if I don't speak English but do know Esperanto, I can read that her, the type instance of is human, homo in Esperanto. And the sex is ina, apparently female in Esperanto. And the nationality is usono, from the US, American, right? And the name, etc., the date of birth, where she was born, what languages she speaks, the occupation, etc. I mean, this is the same data that we already have in Wikidata about this lady, but it's presented to me in Esperanto. It's not as good as a Wikipedia article that could have narrative paragraphs, telling me her life story, but it's much better than nothing, right? And imagine this in other languages, right? We can sort of generate this data completely mechanically. Nobody, again, no actual Esperanto speaker was involved here. Just Esperanto speakers who translated the labels, right? The label for sex, the label for female, the label for human, right? Once in some other context, and the machine, the algorithm that casts the data in Esperanto terms for me. I even have a recording of her pronouncing her name.
This is Helen DeWitt. It's May 12, 2015. A good samurai will parry the blow.
Yeah. So, I got a bunch of information about her in my language. So that's an example of the power of Wikidata. And for those of you who are technical, Wikidata has an API. I won't go into it because not all of you are technical and this isn't a hackathon. But if you're interested, again, this is a link. The slides are available on pre-talks on the program site. And you can play with it and get information yourself. Just one more example of fun with Wikidata. I mean, Wikidata, as you may have seen, is, wiki-like. It has fields and things. It's not like a super friendly user interface for the average person. but you can start building amazing things on top of Wikidata. Wikidata can be the platform for that. And let's look at one of them. It's called Histropedia. And there's a tutorial video. We could try some, I don't know, famous artists. So this gives us a timeline view, right? A really nice, zoomable timeline view of artists, famous artists on a history timeline. And I can zoom in and get more information. And I can click on one of them, say William Blake. If I click on him, I can get like a little summary from Wikipedia. I can look for TVs and film related to William Blake. I mean, you know, it's a whole system that was built on top of Wikidata. Wikidata doesn't give you that, but Histropedia does give you that, entirely powered by Wikidata. That's just one system. And here in this slide, we don't have time to go into it, but I encourage you to click all of these links. Everything you see here was built entirely on Wikidata, and they're very different things. One of them is a search engine for artworks that you can filter by artist and by medium type, like, you know, if it's a drawing or a painting or whatever. Another is a library system. Another is a game of city, country, river, if you know that game. Monument browser. Scholia is a tool for academic papers browsing. You can look at all of these tools. But we will switch over to querying Wikidata. And I want to give you a 5-minute break because you've been a good audience. So you can, there's some water in the corner there if you want. And you can take a 5-minute break, but I will begin in 5 minutes, whether you're back or not. So feel free to go out or get some water. But in 5 minutes, I'll start teaching how to query Wikidata, which is how we can start extracting all of this structured knowledge and do real magic. And for that, by the way, I will encourage you to use your laptops or devices and to come closer because we will be using actual code. Okay, welcome everyone. I'd like to start the tutorial on querying Wikidata. Please take your seats. And again, this will involve actual code. I will encourage you to follow along on your laptops or devices if you want. But to best see the screen, you should come closer. Those of you in the back will have a hard time seeing the details. There are plenty of seats still in the front. I encourage you to come closer. So, in this hour and 10 minutes, I'm going to try and give you as many superpowers as I can. And I want to warn you in advance, they're quite exciting. I don't want you to be, too drunk with power to become like an international villain or something. So prepare yourselves. This is exciting stuff, and it will help you start to leverage the amazing power of Wikidata. So how do we query Wikidata? We query Wikidata with a language called Sparkle, or SparkQL, Sparkle. And there's already a problem, right? The problem is you don't know the Sparkle language, right? So that's what we're here for. This is going to be a tutorial on the Sparkle language geared towards practical use in Wikidata. But before we start, I'd like to remind you of two things. Wikidata will tell you everything it knows, but no more. So if you ask Wikidata, I don't know, what are some Malaysian novels, it will tell you about all the Malaysian novels it knows about, which is definitely not all the Malaysian novels out there, right? Just remember that. You're not querying some mystical, all-knowing being. You're querying a database that has what people have put into it, which is quite a lot by now, but definitely not everything that there is to find or know. The more data and the more links we add to Wikidata, the more powerful it becomes. So do contribute to Wikidata. Every year, Wikidata is becoming more powerful in what it can tell us about the world. So the way we query Wikidata is we go to query.wikidata.org. I encourage you all to do that with me right now in your laptop or other device. Go to query.wikidata.org. You should find a screen like this. Let's give people a second to do that. I'm going to zoom in a bit. But again, if you can't see what this says, query.wikidata.org. Can you raise your hand if you're there, just so I know you're ready? Okay, almost everyone is there. Query.wikidata.org. By the way, Wikidata itself, if you're on Wikidata, wikidata.org, has a link. Right? Oh, it's still speaking French. Awkward. Let's switch back to English. Here on the side, see, query service. You see this link? Query service. This will also take you to query.wikidata.org. So if you ever forget the URL, remember, it's right there on the sidebar of Wikidata. Okay. So yeah, this is the query service, and it says, well, input a Sparkle query. The only problem is we don't know how to do that. So this is where Picasso comes in. Picasso, the famous painter, is alleged to have said, good artists imitate, great artists steal. So we're going to be great artists. And we're going to steal, adopt examples. And Wikidata loves you and wants you to succeed. So it gave you pre-made examples for you to adapt. You can click on this examples folder and you get a whole list. Right now it has 364 queries that you can adapt. And I want you all to click the examples and click the very first one, cats. Let's click on that. And already we solved our first problem, the problem of the empty page, right? How do we even begin a Sparkle query? That problem is solved for us because we already have an example query for us right here. And this query gets us information about all the cats Wikidata knows about. Why does Wikidata know about any cats? Because some cats are notable, right? Some cats are famous. Like Garfield, you've heard of Garfield, right? That's a famous cat, and there are things we can say about that cat. It's an imaginary, I mean, a fictional cat, but still, there are facts about this fictional cat that we could document. And there's a number of real cats that are notable, and we're going to meet some of them. So anyway, not every cat in the world is described on Wikidata, but there are quite a few that are. How many? Let's see. So if we click play, the play button there, we run the query. We don't understand this query yet, but we can run it anyway and see that at the bottom here, we got results. And it says 202 results. There are 202 notable cats on Wikidata. Yeah, it depends, right? I don't know if it's high or low. I couldn't think of 200 notable cats, but that's what I have Wikidata for. So you can see the results. It's 202 results, and there are two columns in the result set. One is item, which, as you can see, shows us a QID. Those of you who have been in the earlier session know that's the identifier of the item in Wikidata. And the item label, the human-readable label in English of this item. Great. Let's just look at one of them just to make sure we actually got cats. I picked one. This one is called Socks. What does it mean? Well, that's the name of the cat. It's a cat named Socks. And it's a cat belonging to Bill Clinton and family. I guess that's what makes him a notable cat. Yeah, pretty famous. And if we look at what does Wikidata know about this cat, this is a Wikidata item, right? This is what we already covered. We can see that it's an instance of a house cat. It's also a presidential pet. Scientific name is Felis catus. Here's an image of Socks at the White House. That's pretty cool, right? Yeah. That's a notable cat. I mean, do you have a picture of your cat at the White House? Sex or gender, male organism. Date of birth, 1989. Place of birth, Little Rock, Arkansas. Date of death, 2009. Yeah, that's pretty good for a cat, right? 20 years. He died in Hollywood, and the cause of death was euthanasia. He was put down. Where did he live, right? He lived in Washington, D.C. Start time, end time. I mean, Wikidata is describing this cat in structured data terms, just like we've seen about Obama. Very randomly, this has turned into a very presidential example session. But anyway, it's because of you. You mentioned Obama. Anyway, and he's named after sock. Like an actual sock, the piece of clothing. Okay, great. And we have a commons category for this cat. This cat has a VF ID. What? Anyway, I don't know. He has a Find a Grave ID. That is one notable cat, right? But anyway, we're not here to talk about the cats. We're here to talk about queries. So the point is, yes, it did find us a whole bunch of cats on Wikidata. Yes? We always are concerned about the provenance of that information, but not in this session, because here we're learning about how to query Wikidata. But if you're asking about, like, can we query by provenance? Yes, we can, but that's a little more advanced. Yeah, well, there's a reference down there, if you look at the item. Okay, so how did this query work? Now let's try and understand how it worked so that we can query for famous dogs, right? So let's look at this query line by line. You have this in front of you, right? Okay, I'm going to zoom in even more, and we'll go by it line by line. There's just 7 lines to this query. The first line is the hardest. It's a comment. It doesn't mean anything to the query engine. I could write whatever I want here. It says cats just to remind me what this query is about, because just looking at a query, it's a little difficult to remember what it's about. So this comment line, I was joking when I said it's the hardest. This comment line is just for humans to remind us, what is this about? I could write here lemon pie, okay, and run the query, and I would still get the same 202 results about cats, not lemon pies. Okay, that's just proving the point. This does not matter. We can even do completely without this line. Okay, but it is traditional to have such a line that starts with a hash mark, pound sign, whatever you call it, to just remind us what the code we wrote is about, right? Like, I don't know, list of all cats, right? Something like that. But again, it doesn't matter what you write. You can write in your own language. Doesn't matter. Okay, so this is the actual query, these 6 lines now. And if any of you knows SQL, the database query language, try to ignore that fact. Because this looks like SQL, right? Select and where, these are terms some of you may know from the SQL query language. They are, it's inspired by the SQL query language. However, the semantics are quite different. So if you will try to implement your knowledge of SQL here, it'll end in tears. No, I'm kidding, but you will run into problems. So just try and forget everything you know about SQL and listen to the explanation about Sparkle here. Okay, so the select line is controlling what columns will appear in the result set. That's what it does. Try to remember that. If I want to influence what columns I have in the results down here, what controls it is the select line. And you see that the select line said question mark item label. And indeed, I have a column called item, not question mark, just item and item label. Okay? If I remove item label from the select line and run the query, I get only item. Okay? The select line controls what columns we get as a result. Great, that's what it does. So we're down to 5 lines, and they are the where part of the query. That's where the meat is. That's the logic of the query. Every query on Wikidata is essentially telling Wikidata, take all of Wikidata, which is like 100 million items with billions of triples, billions of claims, right? So it's a huge thing. But you never, ever want all of Wikidata, ever. You always have a question that's about some part of Wikidata. And that part is expressed in the where block. I call it a block because after the word where, we have curly braces. And curly braces, like in programming languages, mean all of this is somehow one thing. Treat it as a block. Treat it as one thing. Okay? So this is the where block. And line 4 is just the beginning of the block. Line 7 is just the end of the block. Line 6 is super scary, so we're going to repress it now and forget about it, which leaves us only line 5, right? One line to understand this query. And what does this line say? As you can see, it has 3 parts or elements separated by a space. Again, those of you who have a hard time seeing my screen, please come forward or just bring your chairs. There's plenty of space here so you can see better. The first part is question mark item. The second part says WDT P31, whatever that means. And the third part says WDQ146. And then there's a full stop. Don't forget the full stop. And this somehow logically expresses get me all the cats. How does it express that? So remember, Wikidata is based on triples, right? Item, property, and value, right? And that's exactly what this is. This is a pattern. It's a pattern that we're asking the Wikidata query service to match. In other words, each element here is a pattern we're asking Wikidata to match. Now, thinking question. When we want all the cats from Wikidata, Are we looking for a particular item ID? Who thinks yes? Nobody. Who thinks no? Nobody. You're very confused. Okay. So the list we got, remember the 202 cats that we got, did it have one QID or many? It had 202 QIDs. It had 202 items, each of which had its own QID. So I ask you again, when we want all the cats, are we looking for one particular QID? No. Good, right? We're not. We're looking for all the cats, whatever their QIDs are. Okay? So in our pattern matching, we don't want to specify this QID, right? We want to say whatever QID, and the way we say whatever is with this question mark. In Sparkle terms, this is called a variable, okay? Don't be scared, those of you who are not programmers in the room. A variable just means, I don't know what goes in here. Whatever QID you find is fine by me. Let's just agree to call it question mark item, okay? The question mark is what makes it a variable, and then the item is just the name I'm giving this variable, okay? On the other hand, the second part of the pattern says P31. Now, remember, item, property, value, right? So the middle part is the matching of the property. In this case, I'm not using a variable. I'm saying deliberately, explicitly, P31. What is P31? Who remembers that kind of thing? We don't have to remember. We can hover over it, just hover with our cursor over it. This is harder to do on a tablet, but with a laptop, we can do that. Hover over it, and it reminds us P31 is Wikidata speak for instance of. Remember that very basic property that in humans has the value human? This is instance of. In other words, I'm telling Wikidata, out of all the claims on Wikidata, I want to find claims about instance of. Okay? Things that have an instance of claims. All the claims about highest elevation, land area, those don't interest me. I'm only interested in claims about instance of. Do you understand the filter here? The pattern? Now, the last part says Q146. What is Q146? Who knows? We hover over it, and turns out Q146 is the QID, the item ID, for house cat. Not any particular cat, the species, right? The class of animal that's a house cat. Felis catus in Latin, right? Q146. In other words, I'm telling Wikidata, please get me all the statements that say something, some ID, don't care which ID, is instance of house cat. Which is indeed what I mean, right? Out of all of Wikidata, I only want the items that are instance of house cat. I don't want instance of human. I don't want instance of book. I don't want instance of mountain, right? I'm looking for things that are cats. And things that are cats in human speak, in Wikidata speak, are things that are instance of house cat. That's how Wikidata expresses something being a cat. Are you following me? I need everybody to have gotten this because we're going to build on this, right? So that's how this line works. It says, I want you to match the triples, right? I'm not looking for a particular ID, but I am looking for a particular property, the instance of property, and I want it to have a particular value, the value house cat. So this kind of narrows down all of Wikidata into only the statements about something being a house cat. Yes? Speak up. Yes, thank you for that question. So I have been conveniently ignoring the prefixes, but I have been found out and called out. So yeah, Sparkle is a language that wasn't invented by Wikimedia. It's a standard out there that's maintained by the W3C, the World Wide Web Consortium, and it's meant to handle all kinds of link data, not just Wikidata. As part of that, Sparkle works with URIs, with kind of long strings that start with domain names. And so all of these would actually be https://wikidata.org/property/p31. To save you all that typing, we made these prefixes. They're basically abbreviations, okay? And this WD : is an abbreviation for referring to items, anything that starts with a Q number. And WDT is the prefix for any properties. The way you remember it is you remember Asaf ridiculously pronouncing WDT for property, right? Now this is etched in your minds, okay? T for property. WDT for properties, WD for Q numbers. If you get it wrong, you will get an error message. So that's Wikidata specific. That's not Sparkle magic. That's Wikidata magic. Again, whenever you want to refer to a property, don't just say P31. Always say WDT:P31. Whenever you want to refer to an item, don't just say Q something. Say WD:Q something. Right? Wikidata item and Wikidata property for T. Yeah. Okay, you got it. So. That's the story of the prefixes. Yes. Question. Yes. Yes, there is a list of properties. I covered it in the previous session. It's in the slides. You don't have to remember them. I will show this in a moment. Okay. So this is how this query works. Again, we're asking for all the items that have instance of house cat. And this turns out to have 202 results. And then when we found these items, we ask in the select line, remember the select line? We ask for the item to be shown, that is the QID. Remember, I wasn't looking for a specific QID, so I want to receive all the matching QIDs, all the QIDs that match my query. And because numbers don't mean anything to me, I also want the label, please, right? Remember, without the label, I only get a bunch of numbers. That's a lot less useful. So let's run it again with the labels. Yes, this is better, right? So I have a number, which I can click, right, to get to the item, but I also have a human label like socks. Okay? Yes? Blank QIDs? Oh, you mean these? Yeah. They're not blank QIDs. The QIDs are there. They're blank labels. No properties? You mean when you click into one of them?
I didn't click through all of them, but I was just kind of looking around. At least some of them are blank.
Okay, let's click one of them. Let's click one of them. I mean, the reason you see a number in the, yeah, so this is an instance of a house cat that has no label defined, but it has a mother, it has a child, someone has documented their cat possibly. Yeah. Yeah, you could argue that this may not be a notable cat. This may be just someone documenting their own cat, and this item might need to be deleted. But right now, it's on Wikidata. Yes, we can. It's a wiki. We can delete things, or at least propose them for deletion. Yeah, that's how we roll. Yes? There's a button. There should be a button. There isn't a button. There's a gadget, I guess. This is not my volunteer account where I have all my gadgets. But in preferences, you should be able to enable a gadget that allows you to propose for deletion. There's a process called items for deletion. You add it there. But I don't want to go into that in this introduction session. This is about the queries. So this line, again, is a pattern matching exercise, right? It goes through billions of claims on Wikidata and gives me only the ones matching instance of house cat. Now, thinking question number 2. What if I want to look for all the elephants Wikidata knows about? How would I need to change this query? Any thoughts? Raise your hand. Yes?
You have to change the
the value. Right now, the value is Q146, which is house cat. You say I have to change it. Okay, let's delete Q146. And what do I put instead? Very good. Whatever is the QID for elephant, right? Because just like we were looking for cats by asking what items have instance of house cat, looking for elephants is asking what items have instance of elephant, right? And how do we find the ID? On the assumption that you don't have all the QIDs memorized, right? So Wikidata loves you and wants you to succeed, remember? So after the colon, where the Q number should go, you can press Control Space. Control Space. And if you press Control Space, you have an auto lookup and you can just start typing elephant. Okay? Now, Wikidata says, well, what do you mean? Do you mean elephant, the large terrestrial mammal with trunks from Africa and Asia? Or do you mean specifically Asian elephant? Or do you mean, I don't know, chess variant native to China? I don't know why that's a kind of elephant, but maybe. Anyway, yes, what I meant was the large mammal, right? Okay, so this is what I meant. Turns out it's Q7378. Okay, Wikidata put the number in for me. Remember, you cannot say elephant to the query service. The query service only understands numbers. But this lookup allows you to search using human labels. By the way, I searched using English. But if you change your language here, on the top right, if you change your language to Bengali, you can search for the elephant word for Bengali, and it'll turn it into the Q number, the same Q number. That's pretty amazing, right? So you don't have to know the English term for something to search for it. Yes? Yeah, I don't know the answer to that. Yeah, you don't have control space on mobile, I know. What does work in mobile is the query builder. You have a button there called Query Builder, which I'm not showing in this tutorial because I want you to really learn Sparkle. But I guess in mobile, you would use the Query Builder. But really, Sparkle, like other things close to programming, is best done with a proper keyboard on a computer. Yeah. All right. So let's see if that works. 7378. I run the query. I get 30 results. And yeah, it looks like I got results that are elephants. Let's look at one of them. This is an item about the elephant of Henry III of England. I guess it didn't have a name, so they have to call it the elephant of Henry III. But we know something about this elephant, and there is, I don't know, there are Wikipedia articles about this elephant. All right, so yeah, that worked. Our query now got us all the notable elephants that Wikidata knows about, which is just 30. As you know, cats rule the internet, so what are you going to do? Okay, my point is, by teaching you how to look for cats, I have actually taught you how to look for anything. I mean, any member of a class at least, right? I can now, you can now look for all the rivers on Wikidata. Do you agree? What would it take to look for all the rivers on Wikidata? Changing what? Again, the value, right? Instead of instance of elephant, instance of river. Great. Okay, so already you have one little superpower, and we're going to make some more. But there is the nagging issue of the 7th line, the line that was too scary to even look at, right? So this line is really complex, and the good news is we don't have to understand it at the moment. We just need to respect it. Don't delete it. Leave it in your query. It is there to provide the labels for you. If you leave it out, you will only get Q numbers. You will not get the labels. Okay, that's all you need to know about this line. And you can keep copying it from the cats query, the first example. Whenever you build a new query, just make sure inside your where block, you include this line. Okay? But one thing I will teach you about this line, which is that after the word language here, you see this thing in quotes. It says auto language, comma, EN, English. auto language means I want the result labels to come back in the language of my interface, which right now is English, right? But let's say I use an English interface because that's the language I understand, but I'm trying to make a list for Chinese speakers, okay? Which I don't speak and can't read. I can actually change this. Instead of auto language, I can say, you know what? I want the results to be in Chinese, which is ZH, right? That's the code for Chinese, the language code, the ISO code for Chinese. And let's say I want a list of, I don't know if the elephants have labels in Chinese, so let's pick something that definitely has labels, like names of countries, right? Country. I want things that are instance of a distinct territorial body or political entity, right? Countries. Anything that's a country, Q6256. Again, it's the same query, like all the cats, all the elephants, all the countries, right? But this time, just because I changed that language code, we're going to get a list of items with Chinese labels. And if there's any Chinese readers in the room, you can verify these are names of countries. Okay? So without speaking a word of Chinese, I was able to get a list of country names in Chinese from Wikidata. Okay, so that's the power of this little line here. You can tell it how to find things. And by the way, let's go back to the elephant, okay? The elephant list, 7378. As I thought, there are no Chinese labels for most of these elephants. And that's why in the label column, I still got the number. This is Wikidata's way of telling me I don't have a Chinese label for the elephant of Henry III, right? Now, in this case, it may be useful to specify a fallback language, which is what the comma was about. I can say, I want Chinese, but if you don't have Chinese, give me English. And this is how I do that, right? ZH for Chinese, but the second option is English. And now if I run the query for the elephants, I get English labels because there were no Chinese labels, right? If there were some Chinese labels, I would get the ones that are available in Chinese, the ones that aren't in English. Is that clear about this scary line? We don't have to understand the rest of it. Yes, Dimi. Yes, but not trivially. So we'll get to that later if we have time, and if not, I'll show you during the break. Okay. So we understand how to, what, you had another question? Yes. Yes. So we now know how to search for all the X, right? All the cats, all the elephants, all the countries. Great. But the power of Wikidata comes when we start combining conditions. Not just saying all the countries, because all the countries is something we can get from Wikipedia also, right? Let's start working our way towards more complex things. For example, let's look for famous people from Singapore. Who's the most famous person from Singapore? Yeah, Lee Kuan Yew, right? The first prime minister, longtime leader of Singapore. And in most countries, you know, the most famous person is a football star, a movie star, someone like that. When I try to ask myself, what famous people do I know from Singapore? Lee Kuan Yew is literally the only person I knew of. And I also knew that his son is the current prime minister, but I didn't remember the name. So there aren't many kind of world-famous people from Singapore, or people don't know that they're from Singapore. But we can ask Wikidata, right? So let's look for famous people from Singapore. I'm going to change the comment just so that we remember this is no longer about cats. Famous people from Singapore. Okay? You know what? Let's leave out famous, because that's a different thing. Just people from Singapore. Any people from Singapore that Wikidata knows about. What does that mean, though? The first thing we do when we want to ask Wikidata a question is we have to translate the question from our squishy human speak, people from Singapore, to Wikidata terms. What does it mean for an item in Wikidata to be describing a person from Singapore? What does it mean in Wikidata terms? What properties and values would be involved? Can you think of it? Human, right? For starters, we're not looking for mountains or poems or books, right? So we would want to say, you know what, the item, again, we're not looking for a particular item, right? We're looking for all the people from Singapore. So the item, whatever it is, should have P31 instance of, remember? But the value should be human, which is Q5, correct. If you don't remember that it's Q5, remember you can always press Control Space, type human, and it completes it for you, Q5. Okay, so now this line, again, we can have a comment after every line just to remind us what it means. So, is a human, right? That's a good description of this line. Okay, but this query, by the way, don't try to run that. It won't work because there are far too many humans on Wikidata, and the query will time out. It's too long. And again, there's no real use case for getting all the humans from Wikidata. But we don't want all the humans, right? We want the humans from Singapore. How is that expressed in Wikidata terms? How did Wikidata express that Obama was an American, remember? Yeah, there was a field called country of citizenship, right? Country of citizenship. By the way, if we're not sure, we can just go to Wikidata and look at, for example, the item about Lee Kuan Yew, or anyone we can think of that has the kind of thing we're looking for, find that property, then ask about it here. So we are adding a second line, and this is the new superpower, combining conditions. The second line says, well, we're still asking about no particular item, so we're saying question mark item, and now we're saying the property, what was it called? Something about citizenship. Let's just start typing citizen. There we go. Country of citizenship. P27. Okay. I want property P27 to have the value, what? Singapore. Which is what? Who knows? Let's look it up. It's Q334, of course. Okay. And we end each condition line with a full stop. Okay? And this line will add a comment, is a citizen of Singapore. Okay, let's run this query and see what happens. When we run this query, we get 2,199 results. Okay, how many people are there in Singapore? A little more than 2,000, right? Why didn't I get all of them? Yeah, because nobody taught Wikidata about every citizen on Singapore or anywhere else, right? Wikidata is still about notable people, people that there's something to say about them in a sourceable way, etc. So far, Wikidata has information, has items about 2,200 people from Singapore. Great. And since our language line still says Chinese, I got their Chinese names where they are available, and English where it is not available, right? Great. These are, I hope, people from Singapore. Okay? So I want us to realize how much our powers just grew. We can now combine conditions. And when we have multiple lines in Wikidata, they are anded together. They are the intersection logically. So only items that satisfy both terms, people who are human and also have citizenship Singapore. Okay? If a person is a human but is not a citizen of Singapore, wouldn't be in the query. If an item is a citizen of Singapore but isn't a human, not sure how that could happen. I am sure how that could happen. If a character in a book, and a fictional character, could be a citizen of Singapore, right? In the fiction. A fictional character is not an instance of human, right? Harry Potter is not instance of human, because Harry Potter is not a human. He's a fictional human, right? He's a character in a book. Okay? So Harry Potter, the fictional character, is a citizen of the UK, right? But if I ask for all the humans who are citizens of the UK, I would not expect Harry Potter to show up. Okay? But just to clarify, how might it be that someone might be a citizen of Singapore and not a human? Maybe if they're a fictional character who is a citizen of Singapore in the fiction. Okay. So I want to stress to you that now that we learned how to combine conditions, our powers have grown exponentially. We can now ask not just all the X, all the elephants, all the poems. We can now ask all the X's that are also Y. And actually, we can ask all the X's that are also Y and Z, right? We can now combine 17 conditions. We can now already ask convoluted questions like I gave at the opening session, like who are some painters who were born in Paris but died in London and were born and spoke German? I can ask that, or you can ask that already. Do you agree that you can form, if you think about it, you could form such a query now, right? Just combining properties and values, right? Instance of human, occupation, painter, place of birth, London, place of death, Berlin, language spoken, German, right? 5 conditions, but that will give you that query. Are you feeling the power? Remember, use it for good and not for evil. Okay, so that's great. Now, what if I want... So just to prove this, let's just do a quick proof. Only politicians from Singapore. How do I do that? What do I add? Yes. Yes, so we add another line. Again, we're not interested in a particular QID. We add a property, WDT for property, and we take the occupation property, which is P106, I happen to remember, and politician. I don't remember the Q number for politician, so I press Control Space, type politician, here we go, 82955 is a politician, and now I have, instead of 2,200 people, I have only about 200 people, right? Let's remove the Chinese so that it's easier for everyone to read. There we go. A list of Singapore politicians. Shanmugam is a minister, right? In Singapore. Any Singaporeans here? Yes? Shanmugam is a minister, right? Yeah. Okay. So... yeah, so we proved to ourselves we can just add any condition we want. And now I'm going to teach you another superpower. Combining things. What if I want a list of people from Singapore who are either politicians or poets? Either or. So drunk though you are with power, you actually don't know yet how to do an or, right? Because we said every line here is an and. Both this and that and that and that. But what if I want both politicians and poets? What if we just add another line here that says occupation, 106, poet. Poet, person who writes poetry, that's what I meant, yes, is a poet. Am I going to find politicians and poets? 0 results. Why did I get 0 results? What? Because, yes. Yes, it's an and condition, and according to Wikidata, there isn't a single Singaporean politician who is also a poet. This may or may not be true, but Wikidata doesn't know of any Singaporean politician who also is a poet. If this is not true, I encourage those of you who know to fix this. But that's what I asked Wikidata, and that's what it answered. Remember, Wikidata will answer what you asked for, not what you meant to ask. So let's be very clear. That's not what I meant, right? I meant either politician or poet. Now, the way we can express that is using a new keyword called union. Union, as in logic, right? We have intersection and union, right, in Venn diagrams. So what we want is a union between everybody who's a politician and everybody who is a poet, right? These are different circles. We don't want the intersection of those circles, which it turns out is an empty set in Singapore. We want the union of it, both that circle and this circle. How do we do that? We surround each part of the union with curly braces. So let's put a curly brace here, a curly brace here around the politician, and a curly brace here, opening curly brace, close curly brace there around the poet, and between them we write union. Okay? This union that. And now, how many results do we expect to find? How many? I don't know exactly, but what do I know about the results? Should be more than 200, right? The number of politicians, assuming there are any poets that Wikidata knows about in Singapore, right? And the answer is yes, we found 252 results. And presumably, some of these results, I really know nothing about Singaporean poets, but presumably some of these results now are not politicians, but are poets. Okay, so this is your new superpower. You can now make either or, which again expands your possibilities. Right now, you can not just ask, who is a writer who was born in Paris and died in Berlin? You can now say, who is a writer who was born in either Paris or Rome and died in Berlin or New York and spoke German or French, right? You can now ask such weird questions. Remember when I said earlier, maybe it never occurred to you to ask such questions because you knew nobody can answer it. No reference librarian can reasonably answer. Give me a list of people who were born in either Rome or New York. You know, they would say, yeah, can't answer that question. Wikidata can. So we have this superpower. How about another superpower that is relevant for Singapore? What if I want to ask, who are politicians whose father was also a politician? I can think of one in Singapore, right? But really, this isn't special to Singapore. Most countries have political dynasties, right? At least some politicians are the sons or daughters of politicians, sometimes 3 or 4 generations. So this is an interesting query to run about any country, really. And kind of the number of results can also tell you something about that country's politics. Is it full of political dynasties? You know, like George Bush, right? The 2 presidents Bush, or less, right? So how do we do that? For this, if you think about it, can you do it right now with what we have? Can you ask Wikidata, with everything we've learned, Let's try. So we want humans, right? We want them to be politicians. Let's remove this union. Okay, let's remove the poets. We want them to be from Singapore. So far, so good, right? This is the query we already had. Singapore politicians, right? Now, how do we express the fact that their father was a politician? Okay, so they should have some father, right? Remember, we saw in the item about Obama, they had a father property that was pointing to Barack Obama Sr. So there is a father property. Again, if we're not sure, we could just go to Wikidata and take a look at a similar item and find out. Or we can literally, press Control Space and just type father and see what comes up, right? Turns out, yes, there is P22, father. Okay. So we want our item, the thing we're talking about, to have a father. What do we put in the value property? A variable. Very good. Why? Because we're not looking for a specific father, right? This is the key. This is the superpower. Adding a second variable. And again, this gives you exponentially more power. So if you're feeling this is too much for you, maybe you should leave. I don't want to overwhelm you. But again, remember, if we just type some Q number here, like the Q number for Barack Obama Sr., it will only find politicians from Singapore whose father is Barack Obama Sr., which presumably is 0, right? They find no results. I want all the politicians from Singapore who have some father. Some father is the key word. Just like I'm not looking for a particular QID, so I keep saying question mark item, here I'm also not looking for a particular value, and this is new. Everything we've done so far was about specific values, right? So I'm not looking for a specific value, which means I'm looking for a variable, and I need to give it a name. Let's call it father, okay? And this line says, has a father. Now, everybody has a father, but not always Wikidata knows about the person's father. So this actually verifies that the item has a property father with some value. Any value is good. Some value. Okay, let's run this query now, and we get 10 results. We get 10 results, okay? Including Lee Hsien Loong, the current prime minister, who we know is the son of Lee Kuan Yew, a politician. But is everyone else here a politician whose father is a politician? Probably not. Because we didn't actually express that condition, did we? That the father is also a politician. How can we do that? Well, here's the key. Here's the superpower. Once we have defined the father variable in the value field there, we can now add conditions about the father. Our next condition line does not start with item. It starts with the father QID, whatever it is. That item should have property P106 occupation with the value politician, which is Q82955, who has a father who himself is a politician. That's what this line means. Did everybody follow that little twist? So this line here said, I want the original item, the one about the politician, to have some value in the father field. Now, whatever that value is, let's agree we call it question mark father. And once we've agreed on that, now I want to pose further conditions about a different item. That's the new superpower. Until now, we only asked questions about one item's properties, property value, right? Now we suddenly ask a compound query about multiple items, and that gives us a whole new power. And now we expect this list to only give us politicians who are sons or daughters of a politician father. By the way, we're not asking about a politician mother. It's a different thing. But, okay, so the first result is definitely true. We know that. That's the current prime minister, who's the son of the first prime minister. I don't know who Desmond Lee is, but presumably he's also a Singapore politician whose father was a politician. Yes. Okay, so see, I don't know anything about Singapore politics, but I was able to get this information out of Wikidata using, after all, just a very few simple lines. Once you understand them, they're simple, right? It's not real programming. It's not so difficult to learn. So this is a whole new level of power, because of course now everything we could do about the first item, we can now do about multiple things, right? We can now say, give me painters who were born here and died there, etc., whose father was born there and died there and was a politician. We can start asking arbitrarily complicated things, and people do. Right? People are now able to query the weirdest, most interesting results from Wikidata using this relatively simple technique of the extra variable. Now, this is a good time to get back to the output, because we see these two people, but I don't know who their father was. Let's say I don't know. I mean, I don't know who Desmond Lee's father was. I would like that information in my output, right? How can I get another column in my output? Who remembers? The select line, remember that? Yes, the select line. So let's go back to the select line. What should I add to it, do you think? question mark father, right? The new variable that I introduced, right? Question mark father. Let's add that and see what happens. I run the query again, and what do you know? I have a new column, and it's giving me the father, well, the father's QID, right? But I would like the label of the father, right? The human readable name. How do I get that? How did I get it for the item? Remember? I got it by saying item and item label. What if I ask for father label, right? Father label. Notice the capital L, it matters. Okay, so we run it again, and what do you know? We get the result that Li Xianlong is the son of Li Kuan Yew. Okay, pretty cool, right? Now, item and father, that's a little confusing. It would be more clearer if we said something like child and father, right, in our output. We can do that. We can just rename the variable item to child, an item label to child label, and of course we need to rename it everywhere it appears, right? Item becomes child, and now we run the query again, and we get the results that make a little more sense, right? Child, I mean, there's no magic to the word item. Remember, we just copied it from the cats query. We could have called it question mark cat. We could have called this question mark politician. Whatever makes sense for us, as long as we're consistent throughout the query, right? So this is nice. Now, what if, yes? Leave it out if you don't want the yes, absolutely, yes. Yes, let's look at this. If we don't care about these numbers, we want a nice output that doesn't scare people, we can leave out child and father out of the select, out of the output. Of course, we still need them in the query, but we can just run this query now and get just the labels. What if we also want a little more flavor? What if we want an image for the person? Wikidata has images, remember? It has an image field. So we can add an image, if we want the image in the output. Remember, how do we add fields to the output? The select line, right? So I want to add the image. How do I do that? I don't know, I just say question mark image, right? And I run the query. Well, that did add a column named image, but it didn't bring me the image. Because of course, remember, these names are arbitrary. I could have called it garlic. It wouldn't have given me magically garlics, right? I need to somehow tell Wikidata what I mean, and Wikidata speaks in terms of properties, right? So why did it give me content for father and child, but not content for image? Because I put values into the variables child and father inside the query block. If I want the image to contain an image, I need to populate it in the query block. In other words, I want an image of the child, right, of the current politician. So child has property image, which is P18. Now, what do I put here? Am I looking for a particular image? No, I'm looking for whatever that field says, right? Whatever the image is of that person, so I'm looking for a variable. I'm going to call it image, just out of convenience. Again, I could have called it garlic, right? But that would have been confusing. Who has an image? Okay. And now, I run the query, and lo and behold, I now have images from commons of Li Xianlong. If I click it, I am taken to the image. So it pulled out an extra bit of data. So until now, our output was just the QID and the label. But I've just shown you, I can also get any of the other fields, any value I want from Wikidata to be in the output of the query, if I like. Yes? Yes. Yes, excellent question. I was getting to that. But first I want to show you one more thing before I get to answer your question. This bit here at the top of the results, we haven't talked about it yet, it says table. By default, the query returns a table result set. But I can change it to other types of looking at the information. Now, it didn't make sense until now because all we had was names and numbers. But now that we have an image in our result set, I can ask to look at the results as an image grid. And now I have the same query resulting in a nice image grid, which of course still is clickable and takes me to the item, etc. But that's nice, right? Wikidata gives you that. If I had numerical data coming back, like height or population, right? All the countries with their population, I could have asked for that number to be shown on a graph. If I had a query that returns coordinates, I could have asked to show them on a map. Okay? But first, before I show you that, I want to answer your question about this. So remember, all these conditions are ANDed together, right? Which means the person has to have a father in Wikidata, has to be a citizen of Singapore, and has to have an image. But that's not what I mean, right? Usually what I mean is, if there's an image, please show it. If there isn't, I still want it in the results, right? The image is kind of nice to have. I don't mean the image to be a condition, a filter. Do you agree? Usually I would say, yeah, if there's an image, show it. If not, don't show it. But that's not what I said here. What I said here is it must have an image. Now, it so happens that these two results do have an image, so I still got those two results. But to prove this to you, let's remove the whole bit about the father, okay? Let's remove these two lines, which makes it, again, be about politicians from Singapore. And remember how many we had? 200 and something? Now we have only 112. Why? Because only 112 have images. Because we told Wikidata the item must have an image property. But some of the Singapore politicians don't have an image property yet on Wikidata. So I inadvertently over-filtered my query. And so this is your next superpower, is to say that something is a nice to have, is optional. And for that, we surround what we want to make optional with curly braces, as we know. And before the curly braces, we say optional. Optional image. This says, don't make it part of the condition, but when you find the query, the results, if it has an image, please populate that variable for me. And now we expect this query to return 200 and whatever. There we go, 217 results. And as you can see, Shanmugam has a picture, but Jafri Mahmood does not. Right? So now we have still all the politicians of Singapore that Wikidata knows about. And for those that have an image, we have an image. For those that don't, we don't. Okay? So that's your next superpower. Okay, now let's take a look at more fun. We don't have a lot of time left, but we will try to learn some more superpowers. So how about maps? Let's look at hospitals in Singapore. Okay? Hospitals in Singapore. So I will want a hospital and a hospital label. And the hospital, remember, I called a variable hospital, so it's not item anymore. Don't be automatic about the item, right? It's whatever I call the variable in the select. Hospital is anything that has P31 instance of hospital, right? Anything that is a hospital, a healthcare facility, which is 16917. Nobody remembers that, so let's add a comment, is a hospital. Okay? But not all the hospitals in the world. I want only hospitals that are in Singapore. So let's, how do we say that? How do we express that it is in Singapore? What? Yeah, so for people, we had citizenship, right? But the hospital is not a citizen of Singapore, right? Citizenship is an irrelevant property for hospitals. So we could try location and that could work, but what I really want is the country field. And hospitals generally have a country field, just country. Not country of citizenship, but country. P17. And the value should be Singapore, which is Q334, is in Singapore. Okay, this should give me a list of hospitals in Singapore. And here we have 45 results. I don't know if that's all the hospitals in Singapore, if they're completely covered, or if there are more, but there are 45 hospitals that Wikidata knows about in Singapore. Cool, so I have a list. Now, let's see, there are 45 of them, right? Now I want to put them on a map so that I can see the hospitals in Singapore. But to put something on a map, I need what? Coordinates, right? To put anything on a map, I need coordinates. So Wikidata does have a coordinate location property. We just saw it briefly. Coordinate location, P625. That's the property. What is the value I'm looking for? Variable. I'm not looking for any particular coordinates, right? I'm looking for all the hospitals with their various coordinates. Just like I was looking for politicians with their various fathers, right? Wherever they may be. So I need a variable here. I can call it location or coords or whatever I want, right? Let's call it location. Okay? Has coordinates. Now, until now, we had 45 results. If we run it again, I have 37 results. So 37 of the 45 hospitals have a coordinate location in Wikidata. That already means you can go and add the coordinates that are missing for the other hospitals in your copious spare time. I also want to see these coordinates. They're not appearing in the results. What do I need to do? Add it to the select line, right? Let's add the location here to the select line. And what do I get? There we go. Now I have the location in the results, and it's in the format of point whatever. And of course, this is very useless. We humans cannot read these numbers and make sense of them, but Wikidata loves us and wants us to succeed, so it gives us a map view. And, are you ready for this? Ta-da! How amazing is that? We have ready-made for us a map of the hospitals in Singapore, and we can already, again, without knowing anything else, kind of see, you know, where you can get medical service in Singapore and where it's more difficult, presumably because the population is less dense, it's more nature area or whatever. But in other countries, you can really see, you know, this is a developed province that has a lot of hospitals and this one less, or this is a province that has a lot of Wikipedians documenting it and this one doesn't. Remember this always. Wikidata gives you the data that it has, which may or may not be complete coverage of the world, right? But really, in that sense, you could do a, let's just to give you an example. I mean, clearly people have documented Singapore pretty well. If we take a different country, let's say Tajikistan, okay? Tajikistan. So same query, hospitals in Tajikistan. And we have 0 results. Are there 0 hospitals in Tajikistan? I know nothing about Tajikistan, but I know they have hospitals, right? They must have hospitals. What does this mean? It means people have not put in the data about hospitals in Tajikistan to Wikidata, or at least didn't put in coordinates. Because remember, the coordinates here are not optional, right? What if we make them optional? If we make them optional, we learn that Wikidata is aware of 3 hospitals in Tajikistan. Again, are there only 3 hospitals in Tajikistan? Definitely not, right? There must be more hospitals. But we see here a coverage problem, right? Wikidata is severely undercovering Tajikistan for reasons no doubt related to the regime there and to the size of the active community there, right? But again, if we put this on, I mean, we have literally no coordinates here, but if we had at least these 3 coordinates and we put it on a map, we could have easily seen most of the country seems to have no hospitals, which obviously speaks to a coverage gap. And again, the value of this is not necessarily in saying, these are all the hospitals in Singapore or in Tajikistan, but this is what we know. Here's a coverage gap, right? But we can think of a lot of other uses for this visualization on a map. For example, if you think about a big place like India or Indonesia or Nigeria, right? And you make a query, for example, about politicians and their birthplace, and you put the birthplace coordinates on a map, right? You could get an X-ray view of the country. And again, I know nothing about Nigerian politics, but if I ran that query, I could probably find a pattern that says, well, there are way more politicians in parliament today from this region than from that region of Nigeria. What does that mean? I don't know, but you know, that's a sociological fact that you can work with. You can, I mean, that if you're a, I don't know, grad student looking for topics to research, Wikidata, playing with Wikidata query can easily surface some interesting patterns for you to explore. And again, without knowing anything about the language, the country, etc., I can find at least patterns. I wouldn't, you know, go so far as to submit a Wikidata query map in my thesis and say, this is the fact about Nigeria. I'm just saying that's an opening for you know, looking into what does it mean? Is it about our coverage, or you know, is it really about some sociological fact? On the assumption that we have covered all the members of parliament of Nigeria and we have their birthplaces, then it is indicative of something, right? What is it indicative of? I don't know. Is it that there's a ruling elite from that state in Nigeria? Or is it rather that there's better education there? Or is it, you know, it could be a number of things, but this is an opening for research. Likewise, I can ask Wikidata questions about Wikipedia content. For example, about the gender ratio. Most of you probably encountered statistics like that, right? Like how many of the articles on Japanese Wikipedia are about women versus about men? I mean, how many of the articles about people are about women versus men, right? And you can see that, and you can compare that, right? Different Wikipedias have different gender ratios. You can have Wikidata answer interesting queries like, for example, here's a nice example. Largest cities in the world with a female mayor. That's a cool query, right? And that's the kind of question you can come to a reference librarian and ask, and they don't know how to answer that. Wikidata does. And as you can see, this query is a little more complicated than what I've taught you so far. But again, if we had a little more time and I could walk you through each such command and build it gradually, you would be able to write such a query yourself. The great thing is, like Picasso, you can steal this. You can turn this into another, you know, an isomorphic query. Maybe not the largest city, maybe the largest country with a female prime minister or something, now that you have the example. So here we go, right? Tokyo, Harbin, Mexico City, Bogota, these are all cities that have a current female mayor. How amazing is that? Yes, you had a question. Yeah. Excellent question. Excellent question. Let's go back to, where was our, here we go. Let's go back to our politician query. Using the undo function. There we go. Politicians from Singapore. Let's say we want the image if they have one. Let's remove the father. But you say, what if I only want living people? Right? I don't want dead Singapore politicians. So this query, remember, human, politician, citizen of Singapore will include dead people because we didn't exclude them. Right? So this is the query that gives us 217 results, and which includes Lee Kuan Yew, for example, who is dead, right? How do we exclude that? So that's an excellent question, because I haven't taught you how to negate things, right? What is the definition of a living person in Wikidata terms? No death date, right? That's the machine expressible definition of a living person is a person for whom we have no death date, right? Arguably death place. Some people have a death place, but not a death date, but that's relatively rare. So let's go with death date. So this person who we're now calling child, I mean, even though we're no longer talking about the child and father, we can still call it child, whatever. Property, the property is death date or date of death. By the way, I didn't remember this properly. I thought it's called death date. I started typing. Wikidata helps me and corrects it to date of death. That's fantastic. Date of death. Now, what should the date of death be? What is the value? Any value, right? I'm not looking for people who died on a certain date. So let's call it, I don't know, DOD, date of death, okay? Or let's be clearer, death date, okay? So what am I looking for now? Now the query is for dead Singapore politicians, right? People who have a death date, has a death date. Let's prove this to ourselves. Let's run the query. And now we have only 44 results, right? So most of the 217 politicians are living people, presumably, right? And we have here a bunch of people. Lee Kuan Yew is one of them. Great. Looks good, right? Assuming these people are all dead. But I want the inverse of that, right? I want people who aren't dead. How do I do that? So that can be simple. I surround it with curly braces. You know this by now. And I say, not. How's that? Or minus is the more common, yeah, minus. Minus, so I want people who are human, are politicians, are citizens of Singapore, minus the ones that have a death date, whatever it is, right? And now instead of 217 politicians, I have 173, right? Which is the inverse of the, whatever it was, 40-something who are dead. And in this list, I do expect to find Lee Hsien Loong, but not Lee Kuan Yew, yes. Right? And that is how we do it. That is how we exclude things. And by the way, the fact that minus and optional and union all work with blocks, with curly braces, tells us that we can exclude complex conditions as well, right? I could, for example, say, I want politicians from Singapore minus ones who are dead and spoke Tamil, right? So exclude dead Tamil-speaking politicians, but not dead Mandarin-speaking, you know, just inventing some complicated thing. But I can, because it's a curly brace, I can add as many conditions as I want here and really reach very convoluted logical chains. Okay, so we saw maps, we saw oh, we didn't see charts actually. Let's look at causes of death rankings. That's a nice query. So this is a query about what are the overall causes of death listed on Wikidata. Of course, not every person who died has a cause of death field in Wikidata, but some do, you know. And we have here a table. And the most common cause of death in the world? No. The most common cause of death among notable people documented on Wikidata is myocardial infarction, which is more colonially known as heart attack, right? That is the most common cause of death, closely followed by cancer. Okay, now again, we could say, well, that's the most common cause of death in the world. It may or may not be true, because notable people, right, also tend to be better off socioeconomically, right? Very few notable people die of dengue fever these days, right? But a lot of people die of dengue fever in the world. I'm just calling this out, right? So we're always careful about the results we get from Wikidata. They're always implicitly biased to all of the entities that are on Wikidata, which does have some baggage with it, right? So if we were wanting to say something about, you know, world epidemiologics, No, but not, well, anyway, an epidemiological fact about the world, this would not be a good source, right? Wikidata, because of this bias, right? Because it will leave out the causes of death of the masses of poor people, unnotable people who, for whatever reason, may have different causes of death, right? Notable people, again, tend to die less of preventable disease. They tend to die less of hunger, of exposure, right? Tend to. Okay, so this is a nice question nonetheless. It involves a superpower we haven't discussed yet, which is counting. You can get Wikidata to count for you, right? What we see here is the count of reasons of death. We don't see here the individual people who died of cancer, etc., right? We only see the total number of people who died of cancer, etc. But this count can now be shown, again, using this button, for example, on a bubble chart. This is nice, right? Gives us, again, an instant, pastable, this graphic is ready to paste into your presentation or paper and gives you this distribution. So any kind of query that has a kind of distribution, again, you could do a query about politicians and the provinces or towns that they come from, and then again, count that and throw it up in a bubble chart, just to show where politicians tend to come from. Or not politicians, where do poets tend to come from? So that's another nice example. I wanted to cover, yes, we have only a few minutes left. So here's another fun query. And again, these are, they're in the slides. I'm going to be sharing the slides with you. And I'll paste it in the Telegram channel of Wikimania. So again, you'll be able to click on them and steal this query and adapt it to what you like. I last used this example in Turkey, so I made examples on Turkish, but of course, you're free to run them on your own. Wikipedia. This one is about the top 20 Turkish women who are covered in other Wikipedias, but not in Turkish. Okay? That's basically a to-do list, right? If you're a Turkish Wikipedian looking for subjects to cover, and I show you a list of women who are Turkish and are covered on English or French or German or somewhere, but not on Turkish Wikipedia, there's a to-do list for you. And Wikidata query helps you do that, right? And again, how do I change this to be about people from Singapore, or about Chinese Wikipedia, or about Tamil Wikipedia, or Malaysian Wikipedia? Obviously, I just need to find the right Q number here that means Turkey and change it to Singapore. The Q number that means Turkish and change it to Chinese, etc., right? That's how we, disciples of Picasso, that's how we roll. So we can run this query and find a list of Turkish women who are covered in other languages, the top 20, right? So here we go. This one doesn't sound Turkish, but she's a Turkish citizen, and she's an Olympic runner. She's covered on 21 different Wikipedias, but not Turkish Wikipedia, right? And this name sounds Turkish, but she's a Swedish politician, right? So probably Turkish, culturally Turkish, but she's a Swedish politician, which may explain why she's not covered on Turkish Wikipedia, probably is covered on Swedish Wikipedia, but not just Swedish Wikipedia, but 11 other Wikipedias as well, but not on Turkish. So again, this is using the power of Wikidata query. Again, I haven't taught you how to do this query, but you have the query and you can adapt it to your language, your Wikipedia, but it shows you how with these few lines of code of Sparkle query, I can suddenly get like an X-ray vision into this Wikipedia, into that culture. Very, very powerful. And I did want to show you the distribution of biography articles by gender. And let's take, not Turkish, let's take, I don't know, Malaysian Wikipedia. So this will show us a list of the biography articles, the distribution of articles about women on Malaysian Wikipedia by occupation, okay? Meaning what kinds of women are more covered and less covered on Malaysian Wikipedia. Does anyone have any guesses? What is the most common occupation covered for women on Malaysian Wikipedia? Actress. What? Researcher? Athlete? Yeah. Interesting question, right? Not a simple question to answer, but simple with Wikidata. Yeah, actor. Whoever guessed actor is the winner here. 3,000 articles about women actors in Malaysian Wikipedia, 1,500 about singers and film actors and models and television actors. So the first non-showbiz profession here is politician with 600 articles, right? So a lot more coverage of show business women in Malaysian Wikipedia than any other profession, politicians, writers. Again, more show business. Football players, 224 women football players documented on Malaysian Wikipedia. But again, not speaking a word of Malaysian, I have a kind of X-ray of what that Wikipedia is like in terms of how it covers professions. And of course, we could ask the same question about men, right? And compare, right? And let me tell you, I leave this as an exercise for you to play with. But if you look at some Wikipedias, it's quite striking, right? How men are covered as sports people and politicians and writers and things, and women first and foremost as entertainers, models, pornographic models are common in some wikis. I mean, you know, as objects, which is a bit upsetting, but also indicative, right? That is what that Wikipedia centers on or does more than other things. And it's also, if you want to be optimistic and constructive about it, that's room for a wiki project, right? Let's cover, Malaysian women scientists, right? Again, using such a query, you can really fuel such an initiative, and you can also track your progress, right? Start some project for covering women Malaysian scientists, and a year on, run this query again, and you can show how this was, I don't know, the 11th most covered profession, and now it's the 6th or whatever. Or now it's, 30% of the total biographies about women. So this is our time today. There's plenty more to learn about querying Wikidata. I hope I've given you a taste. I hope you feel I've given you the power to do it yourself. I remind you, be like Picasso, steal other people's queries shamelessly. One last thing, on my user page, my volunteer user page, so that's on Wikidata. My volunteer user page is IJON. Okay, IJON. You can also just search Asaf Baltov if that's easier. That's my name on the program. And on my user page on Wikidata, there is a link to an introduction to Wikidata video that's even more comprehensive than what I gave this morning, and a link to a Sparkle tutorial that's more comprehensive than what I gave today because I had 2 hours for it. But also, right here at the bottom, Wikidata queries to steal. So you can just click on that, and I have collected for you a whole bunch of Wikidata queries, and each one of them lists exactly what it uses, has comments, and even a quick try it link that already starts the query engine with this query loaded. Please, please, please steal this, adapt it, use it for good and not for evil. Thank you for your attention. We are taking a break, 1 hour lunch break. 1 hour, please be back by 1:45 for the next sessions here. No longer from me, I'm done for the day, but still about Wikidata, as you see in your program. 1:45 here. Thank you. Someone asked me at the break about this. This is my Wikimedia Cuteness Association companion. His name is Shlomo. He's a camel, and he's supervising all of my talks.